Okay. A passion for destruction is also a creative passion. This is the slogan spray-painted on the side of corporate giants in frustrated rebellion. But what is really known of Mikhail Bakunin? His theories of anarchism didn't fully envelop until the mid to late 1860s. His real influence lay in the persistent and convicted activism up until that point. His history then is fairly straightforward and chronological until the First Internationale, where he spearheaded his key arguments against Karl Marx and his repressive dictatorship of the proletariat. His personal influence stretched from contemporaries such as Karl Marx and Peter Kropotkin. His arguments carried on to Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman, where his theories are carried today by Noam Chomsky. Bakunin was obviously prolific, but what is lost in translation throughout history and failed anarchist movements of today? Mikhail Alexandrovich Bakunin was born on the 30th of May, 1814 to an aristocratic family in Priam-Lukino, just northwest of Moscow. It's important to note that aristocratic families ruled every governing economic and social relationship since the 14th century. When Bakunin was just 14, he left for military training for the Russian Imperialist Guard. Just 3 years after graduating at the Artillery University in 1835, he became disillusioned with aristocratic life. In the heat of taking his sister's side against an unhappy organized marriage, he rebelled against the rest of his family and rejected his father's pleas to continue the military. Instead, he left to Moscow to study philosophy. He made friends at the local university quickly. In just a few months, he developed a small philosophical circle dedicated to presenting new ideas to fellow students. It was during this time that Bakunin developed his ideas of immanence, the idea that divinity innately manifests itself in every material sphere. His life was divine through and through, Bakunin said about Jesus Christ. Full of self-denial, he did everything for mankind, finding his satisfaction and his delight in the disillusion of his material being. Because we've been baptized in this world and are in communion with his heavenly love, we feel that we are divine creatures, that we are free, and that we have been ordained for the emancipation of humanity. Now, coming from the most anti-authoritarian anarchist, as he became to be known as, this is an understandable shock, but it's obvious that these ideas were at least fundamental in establishing, a basic philosophy of communal living. Bakunin's writing continued to have semi-religious overtones until the 1860s, where his disgust with theology grew more and more apparent. Bakunin wrote sporadic articles on different subjects from 1840 to 1860. This is known as the Pan-Slavic era, an era of intense and dedicated activism. His real theoretical work came after this period. However, his involvement with some of the following events was crucial in his development. More and more, Bakunin became influenced by Hegelian philosophy while at the college. He published the first Russian translation of Hegel's work. In the heat of more conflict with his father, Bakunin left for Berlin in early 1840. In search of a career as a professor, he soon immersed himself with the radical Hegelian left, and soon after joined the socialist movement in Berlin. After developing a passion for socialism, he abandoned his career for the advancement of revolution. There was a convergence of events when the Russian Empire became aware of his radical political involvement and ordered his return to Moscow. At the time of dismissing his pursuit in a career as a priest of truth, as he called it, the time couldn't have been more precise and perfect. He refused to return while knowing his belongings would have been confiscated, his property turned to the Tsar's regime for redistribution among more prominent nobles. He left with the German poet and revolutionary comrade George Herwegh to Switzerland. Bakunin became affiliated with William Wetling, whom Engels called the founder of German communism. At this time, Bakunin actually called himself a communist. And while he wrote for the German communist, I'm going to slaughter this, Schweizerich Republikaner, the Russian police still chased him. This was around the time that Bakunin wrote The Reaction in Germany, which was the passion for destruction is also a creative passion, circa 1842. Bakunin escaped Waitling's arrest for revolutionary agitation while in Geneva. However, the police reports circulated to the imperialist police. The Russian ambassador in Bern wrote Bakunin calling again for his return to Russia. Bakunin, of course, went to Brussels instead. This was the first time that Bakunin heard of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. It's important to note that Bakunin at this time was self-admittedly a non-intellectual, as he called himself. He had little developed theory at this point. What makes him, like I said, what makes him worthwhile is his dedication to these various uprisings in Europe. Within the next 4 or 5 years, shit, let's skip that shit. That's specifically in Brussels, Bakunin met Joachim Luluel. Luluel was a notable and enthusiastic historian who escaped Poland and helped form the Democratic Society for Unity and Brotherhood of All Peoples, in conjunction with Marx and Engels. Poland was going through a people's revolution called the Greater Poland Uprising. And to give some background, the people of Poland mounted an armed military insurrection against Prussian forces. The Prussian army, with political and financial support of the imperialist Russia, later squashed these uprisings. They were slaughtered. Later, in a speech that commemorated the insurrection, he called for an alliance of Polish and Russian peoples towards the definitive collapse of despotism in Russia. What's significant is Bakunin's background in this event, seeing his home, imperialist Russia, suppress these uprisings of self-determination in favor of economic interests, and not just within Poland, but with Prussia, who directly suppressed them. With the political background set, Bakunin's criticism of this dispute clashed with Luluel, a Polish nationalist, because he fought for the autonomy of non-Polish people, caught in the crossfire, so to speak. Another criticism that Bakunin made was against the Polish clergy. He felt that they didn't logically and accurately portray the Polish people. They pursued private interests and in some cases supported the Prussian invasion and suppression. In 1844, Bakunin went to Paris, which was the hot spot for European radicalism. He established contacts with Pierre-Joseph Proudhon and Karl Marx. It was here that Emperor Nicholas issued a decree stripping Bakunin of his title and his privileges as a noble. Should the Russian authorities ever get their hands on him, he would be convicted to a lifelong exile in Siberia. Bakunin, of course, again responded with a lengthy response, denouncing the emperor as a despot and calling for democracy in Poland and Russia. Around this time, some Russian authorities speculated at Bakunin being a Russian agent who had exceeded his orders. He'd escaped every attempt to arrest with policing networks from Prussia, Switzerland, Germany, London, Brussels, and now, while he was in Paris. Bakunin continued to speak out and remain active. It's interesting to speculate his call for various European alliances as a precursors to the events that were about to happen, such as the Paris Commune. Before that, however, the revolutions of 1848 broke out, and Bakunin is ecstatic. The Springtime of Peoples, as it came to be known, was a collection of European insurrections that broke out in Italy, France, Germany, Denmark, Hungary, and Switzerland. And it was generally, as Alexis de Tocqueville put it, society was cut in two: those who had nothing united in common envy, and those who had anything united in common terror. With states' few individual political motivations, this was generally the case. Tens of thousands of people were killed and tortured fighting for self-determination and democracy in their city-states. The political and social foundation of Europe had been shaken by radicalism and the emergence of socialism. Despite the huge social impact these uprisings gave birth to, there was no huge systematic political change. There was just social change, and again, the precursor to these bigger events that were about to happen. In 1849, there was a continued insurrection in Dresden. Bakunin was key in preparing and organizing the defenses against Prussian troops. The defenses were squashed against the ill-equipped peoples of Dresden. Bakunin was captured. His comrade Richard Wagner wrote about the event. He had to submit his huge beard and bushy hair to the tender mercies of the razor and shears. A small group of friends watched the operation, which had to be executed with a dull razor, causing him no little pain. under which none but the victim himself remained passive. We bade farewell to Bakunin with the firm conviction that we should never see him alive again. The Prussians sent him to rot in the notorious St. Peter and St. Paul fortress. Emissaries of the emperor requested a confession to break Bakunin spiritually and thusly physically. Since all his actions were known, he had no secrets at this point, and he said, "You want my confession, but you must know that a penitent sinner is not obliged to implicate or reveal the misdeeds of others. I have only the honor and conscience that I have never betrayed anyone who has confided me, and this is why I will not give any names." Emperor Nicholas responded, "He is a good lad, full of spirit, but he is a dangerous man, and he must be